And mute myself and Bishop take over.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Prim. Hello, Justice Kennedy. How are you?
Good evening. How are you?
Doing fine. I want to thank you for being a part of this endorsement and ratings process. And it's a process to help us, as Brother Prim has said, to give us a better indication of who you are, what you're able to do, give us some insight, background, and your legal experience. And we're thankful to be able to have one of the justices that is already on the Supreme Court on here with us today. And it's our first time in Zoom, so we're really thankful for welcoming you to be a part of this process. The NAACP, as Jerry said, will be rating you, and PENPAC, which is formerly incarcerated individuals, as well as GPAC, will be endorsing those individuals after we have heard from them. We make a decision relative to your comments. So with that, I want to ask you to just go and give us a little bit of knowledge and background about yourself, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all of you taking time out of your schedules to be here tonight. I'll start with my professional experience, 34 years of service in the justice system with a broad-based experience. I have to begin with, I have an undergraduate degree in social work, so I think it shapes my mindset as I have worked in the justice system. I was a police officer in the city of Hamilton for 3.5 years as a patrol officer, and then I was a civilian assistant to the chief, and I wrote police procedure and policy for our accreditation program. I resigned my position to clerk for a general division judge in the Butler County Court of Common Pleas. So I had started law school by that time. As I became a lawyer, I hung out a shingle down on Dayton Street in the city of Hamilton, and I did criminal defendant representation. I represented juveniles who were charged with crimes as well, and I also served as counsel for families that were going through the process of abuse, neglect, dependency cases in juvenile court. Probate court, I served as a guardian. As I practiced, I became a magistrate in the civil aspect of the area and municipal courts. I did tax reclamation work, or working for Betty Montgomery and trying to collect back taxes. And then also in that position, because of one of the cases I tried against a police department, I was hired to be a warrant officer to test the credibility of officers and citizens who wanted arrest warrants as a result of that case. And then after 8 years of practice, I ran for a trial court judgeship, and I spent 14 years on the trial court bench in domestic relations in Butler County. I was one of the first to do a non-support docket on my own, working with Jobs and Family Services and them shepherding in the individual that would help us identify what were the barriers to employment for individuals, to help them overcome those barriers or hurdles, allowing them to become gainfully employed, and to help them pay their support so they stop coming back to court. And then that 14 years of experience led me to run for the Supreme Court, where I have been for the past 7+ years.
Okay. Since you have been on the Supreme Court, and with your background and knowledge of being a defense attorney as well as being a magistrate, and now you're on the Supreme Court, how will you help right the wrongs of a flawed criminal justice system that is upon poor people and minorities? How have you done that?
So I think there are two elements for myself. As a practicing attorney, I challenged the juvenile court's treatment of female juvenile delinquents. At the time, they were running a rehabilitation program, but only boys could get in. And my young ladies were being shipped to DYS. So I challenged them on that, what I consider gender discrimination, that because they weren't creating an avenue for my female clients that they would end up in DYS while the young men could stay in county. That was eventually changed with that. I also spent a lot of time with the juvenile offenders talking about the Compass program, trying to create strategies, noticing the elements in my clients' lives, trying to address those 5 areas of life so that they weren't coming back into the system. I did everything I could to make sure no child went to DYS when I was representing them, because I knew, given my educational background, that that was a gateway to not only just reincarceration in DYS, but reincarceration in the adult system. And that would also go hand in hand with my criminal defense work for adults, trying to help them stabilize their life, always arguing for community control, probation, not institutionalization, because that really just became that pathway. Since being a justice, working with Eve Stratton, former Justice Eve Stratton, really working on specialty courts. Right now we're doing the Veterans Treatment Program. She is also involved in mental health, and we are looking at substance abuse specialty courts. I think the biggest contribution that I've made also was the non-support docket, helping those individuals who were in front of me for non-support, finding ways to break down barriers to employment for them. And then with my work with Eve, switching back to that, I think that having the conversation with judges across Ohio who actually run specialty dockets, there's a program called Bridges Out of Poverty. At the time of his untimely death, Chief Justice Moyer was actually trying to incorporate the Bridges Out of Poverty program within the drug treatment, because it's a holistic approach. You know, what I find in substance abuse users, that really isn't the driver of their use. It's something else that's gone on in their life, or something else happening that they're trying to mask or feel better about in their use. And that is just really the snowball effect. So I think that from the perspective of even a college student working down at the Dove Shelter in Cincinnati, helping women actually, what I would call, do that trial mock interview, helping them with job applications, and actually going through that screening process of what a job interview would look like. I think from college through today, I think I use all my tools to better that. I see a need for more reentry courts in Ohio. I've spoken about it at the Adult Parole Authority and Probation. So I've done a lot of training with Parole and Adult Probation Authority as well.
Okay. Since you've been on the board, what new or different perspective have you brought to the Supreme Court?
I think my different perspective is that variety of experience of being able to have the conversation about what is the reality of what it's like to practice, of what it's like to have an individual where you're explaining the ramifications of the charges that they have been charged with, what that means if they go forward with the trial, the likelihood of successes, analyzing evidence. I also think I come from it with a perspective of understanding what happens in the system as it goes. If you looked at the justice system, I still believe the greatest power rests with prosecutors. So to me, they're in the driver's seat. And when they're overcharging, and you're looking at those charges with respect to your own client and weighing that out of, can they actually make that charge, it really becomes that really Hobson's choice of rolling the dice for that trial versus pleading out to a lesser, which also has collateral consequences. So being able to have those discussions about those cases, what's happened in a case, the overcharging. I think that all comes down to also what the court does when it relates to rules. But sometimes I feel like I'm handcuffed by the General Assembly because they create the laws that our rules cannot contravene. So our rules for judges must be aligned with the statutory enactments.
That makes sense. So what do you see as obstacles on the Supreme Court as you move and progress with the court?
I think some of the biggest obstacles is the lack of communication. It was an interesting phenomena going from a practicing attorney to then becoming a judge, because I think your connection to your community, or to even having conversations with lawyers and other people, are really stripped away from you, because you're supposed to be neutral, impartial, and having relationships impinges upon that. To me, that's layered upon now being a justice in the state. And so much of what happens in these committees, you're not a part of, because there are committees that actually make these recommendations. So you're not really getting the full flavor of what's going on. And some of that would be, to me, like the Domestic Violence Forms Committee, where you can read the statute, but you're getting something else as it relates to the forms. So I think there's a lack of connectivity. I think the way you bridge that is that you actually go out and engage in the things that you're passionate about. So as Justice Stratton was leaving the court, she wanted to focus on mental health and her specialty dockets for drug addiction. She's more focused on mental health now. I picked up the Veterans Treatment Court work, and I see Bridges Out of Poverty as that next implementation step of things that I can do despite the obstacles of being separate and apart.
So as you sit on the Supreme Court and as you have worked with a lower court, do you believe there's an underrepresentation of people of color in the justice system? And if so, how would you work to solve this problem? Can you work to solve this problem?
So I think there is an underrepresentation. I feel like some programs have been developed to try to encourage young people to look at the practice of law. There are educational programs, whether that be mock trial or just educational programs that go into schools in order to talk about the fact that you have the opportunity to practice law. I didn't think I would ever be where I am today. I never in my wildest imagination dreamed while I was in high school that I'd be a lawyer, or I'd be a judge, or that I'd be on the Ohio Supreme Court. All of that came by way of opportunity, by mentors that I had in my life. So I think that those educational outreach programs are vital. I also think, and I think Jerry is the one who, in asking a question on some of our other meetings that we've had, is how do we, as a court, how do we inspire young African-American people to come to work at the court? And that is, we have internships. So to actually use that opportunity to talk to law schools in Ohio about the internships. Those are noted on our website, or the law schools tell the students about that. But there's an underrepresentation, I think, of people who actually write me a letter or call me and say, Justice Kennedy, I'd like to be an intern. And we'll have 3 interns right now for the summer. So I think some of those are the things that I can do. Being asked or being permitted to come to a school to talk about what it's like to be a lawyer, how I found my pathway. I spent a lot of time talking at schools, whether that's junior high or high school, and talking about how I had that pathway. And I accept those invitations at any given time. But usually my approaching a school doesn't really advance that speech. It's really teachers who want somebody like me to come and talk about what that's like.
Okay. So what is being on the Supreme Court, a justice on the Supreme Court, the highest court in the state of Ohio? What is your vision for the future of the Supreme Court? Can you begin to make changes as you're sitting there? Do you see it necessary to make changes or to give suggestions for change on the court?
So I think this is a twofold question. The court is really directed by what the Chief Justice wants to do. So the ability to create task force, unless she's willing to do it, that really rests with her. You have no power as a justice per se. But where I see my greatest strength is, even as a justice, is doing those self-initiatives, like veterans treatment courts, touring the penitentiary. I've been to Marysville and I've been to the Men's Madison Correctional Institute, talking with incarcerated individuals who are veterans, talking about their ability to re-enter into society. And I think I have the power to help with that re-entry and develop programs and talk to judges to get them to see the benefit of it. So having the conversation with judges.
Do you think that with your being on the bench that you can utilize your position as a justice to bring about important changes to a judicial system that disproportionately affects people of color?
Yes, and I think we can do that through our rules. While the General Assembly has requirements of what must be in our rules that must compare with the statutes, I still believe there's an educational forum that's untapped by us. One of those things would be in having the conversation about the rapper's Sue Me video, and talking with the solutions group on that Facebook exchange. I immediately went back to the court then, and I'm pulling old diversity kind of training exercises or CLEs, because to me, working with members to create a better diversity education program for judges to identify bias, whether conscious or unconscious, and actually looking at it through the world of something that you had never seen. Because until you actually watch the Sue Me video, you have no perspective of it.
Do you believe the
That was it,
composition of juries?
Bishop.
I'm sorry. Okay, I had two more questions, but okay, I'll let the justice go. Thank you so much, Justice Kennedy, for sharing with us, being on our first Zoom presentation, and we thank you for participating, and God bless you in your endeavors.
Thank you so much. May God bless all of you. Have a great night.